Deep in the mountains of western Montana, where the map blurs into wilderness and forgotten mining roads fade into moss, a lone cabin stood among the pines. Locals called it Hollow Creek Cabin, though the creek had long since dried. It had no owner, no mail, no smoke from the chimney, until the spring a 12-year-old girl appeared there, barefoot and silent. Her name was Clara Vance. No one knew where she came from. The forest warden found her wandering near the ravine, clutching a tin lunchbox and a single photograph. A woman's hand holding a newborn. When he asked who she was, she only said, "I live here." So they let her stay. A neighbor from the valley brought food every week, and the school bus came as far as the gravel road would allow. Yet Clara rarely rode it. She preferred the stillness of the trees, their patience, their memory. Every night, she wrote in a small notebook, drawing the shapes of roots, tunnels, and shadows that seemed to breathe beneath the cabin floor. The town whispered, "She sees things," but Clara didn't imagine them. One night, a storm rolled in from the Rockies. The wind bent the pines sideways and rattled the cabin like a drum. Clara lit a candle and watched rain spill through the cracked window. Then she heard it, 3 slow knocks beneath her feet. Not on the door, under the floorboards. She froze. The sound came again, softer this time, followed by a scrape, like metal against stone. She knelt, pressing her ear to the rough plank floor. Faintly, beneath the thunder, she heard breathing. When she told the sheriff the next morning, he laughed kindly. "Probably a marmot under the foundation," he said. "They dig tunnels." Harmless things. But Clara had seen the trapdoor. She'd noticed it weeks earlier, a square outline near the hearth, sealed with rusted nails. That night, after the rain cleared, she pried it open with the iron poker from the fireplace. Dust and cold air rose up from the darkness below. Inside, a narrow ladder disappeared into blackness. She lowered the candle, and its light vanished almost instantly, swallowed by the dark. Curiosity outweighed fear. She tied the candle to a string and climbed down. The air changed, cooler, heavier. The smell was of wet soil and rust. When her feet touched the ground, she realized she was standing in a stone corridor, tall enough to walk through. It stretched both ways, one direction toward the hill, the other beneath the forest. Old mining timbers held the ceiling, their surfaces carved with initials and dates: 1911, 1912, 1913. The flame flickered. Somewhere ahead, water dripped rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Then she saw it, a rail, thin and rusted, half buried in mud. A forgotten mine track. Clara whispered to herself, "This shouldn't be here." Because she'd read about the Hollow Creek collapse, a mining disaster that killed 42 men in 1913. The mine entrance had been sealed decades ago, miles away from here. So how did this tunnel reach beneath her cabin? She followed the track until the candle sputtered low. Just as she turned back, she heard a faint whisper carried through the tunnel. Her own name. "Clara." The voice was soft, almost kind, echoing from the dark ahead. She dropped the candle and ran. Her shoulder hit the low ceiling, splintering wood, but she climbed the ladder 2 rungs at a time and slammed the hatch shut. When daylight broke through the curtains, she sat trembling beside the hearth. Dirt streaked her arms. Her notebook lay open beside her, with a new drawing she didn't remember making, a hand reaching up from the earth. A week later, the sheriff stopped by. Someone had reported strange lights near the ridge at night. He asked Clara if she'd seen anyone. She shook her head. But that night, as she watched from the window, she saw a lantern flickering deep among the trees, exactly above where the tunnel would lead. Two figures moved slowly, carrying something heavy between them. Then, as if sensing her, they turned off the light. The forest went black again. Clara closed the curtains, but the whisper of her name returned, fainter this time, like a memory trying to surface. She didn't know it yet, but the tunnel beneath her cabin wasn't just an old mine. It was a burial ground for a truth her town had buried alive. For days, Clara tried to forget what she'd seen. She kept the trapdoor nailed shut, stacked books over it, and told herself the whisper had been her imagination. But imagination doesn't leave footprints. One morning, she stepped outside to fetch water and froze. There, pressed into the mud behind the cabin, were boot prints, large, fresh, leading straight toward her door and stopping there. She followed them with her eyes, but they vanished near the woodpile, as if whoever made them had simply disappeared into the ground. She knew where. That night, she brought a lantern, rope, and her notebook, and pried open the trapdoor again. The ladder moaned under her weight as she descended. The air was colder this time, and the smell sharper, like burnt oil and old metal. She lit her lantern and began walking down the tunnel. The narrow rail gleamed faintly in the light. Every step echoed back at her, like someone was walking behind. At one bend, she found something new. A wooden door, half rotted but intact. A faded sign above it read, "Storage, Shaft 12B." The mining company had supposedly sealed every shaft after the disaster. So why was this one untouched? She pushed the door open. It groaned loudly. Inside were crates, covered in cloth, each stamped with the same word, Vance. Her breath caught. That was her last name. She brushed the dust off and pried one open. Inside were stacks of papers, ledgers, and photographs. Men standing in front of the mine, faces proud and tired. And in one photo, circled in red ink, was a man who looked exactly like her. But the picture was dated 1912. Clara barely had time to react before a sound echoed down the tunnel, a faint metallic clang, like a shovel hitting stone. Someone was down there. She turned off her lantern and crouched behind the crates. The footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate. A man's silhouette appeared at the far end, carrying his own lamp. He moved with purpose, not exploring, but checking, as if this was routine. He paused by the open crate. His gloved hand touched the photo. Then, in a gravelly whisper, he said, "You shouldn't have come here." Clara held her breath, unmoving. The man turned suddenly, his lamp sweeping across the tunnel. Light passed over the crates, then over the ladder she'd used, and then over her notebook, which she dropped near the door. He saw it. He took a step forward, reaching for it, and Clara bolted. Her boots splashed through the mud as she sprinted back toward the ladder. The man shouted something she couldn't make out, his voice echoing like thunder through the stone. She climbed, slipping on the rungs, feeling his hand nearly grab her ankle. She kicked back, hit metal, heard a grunt, and flung herself through the hatch. She slammed it shut and threw the latch, heart hammering. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then, 3 knocks from below. Slow, deliberate, the same pattern she'd heard the first night. The next morning, she ran down to the sheriff's office. Her face was pale, her hands still shaking. She told him everything. The crates, the man, the old photos, the name Vance. He stared at her for a long time, before sighing. "Clara," he said quietly, "I think you need rest." The Vance Mining Company closed over 100 years ago. They were your family, sure, but there's no one left to dig down there. She tried to protest, but he raised a hand. Let it be. Those tunnels are dangerous. But that night, a truck engine echoed through the valley, a sound too new, too alive for a ghost mine. From her window, Clara saw headlights moving slowly up the ridge road toward the hidden shaft. The next day, Clara went to the old library, digging through archives. She found an article from 1913. Hollow Creek collapse claims 42 miners. Explosion. Blamed on gas leak. Owner, Joseph Vance. Investigation sealed by county officials. Joseph Vance, her great-grandfather. Another clipping, buried behind it, read, "Locals claim explosion covered up. Survivors missing." She looked closer. One of the missing names was Samuel Hart, a miner who'd reported unsafe conditions before the disaster. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. There, taped to the back, was a photo of Samuel with a young woman and baby in front of the same cabin she lived in now. The caption read, "Hart Family, Hollow Creek Settlement, 1912. The baby's eyes looked exactly like hers. That night, Clara sat by the fire, piecing everything together. Her family's company had owned the mine. Samuel Hart had tried to expose something and vanished. Her cabin had once been his home, and the man in the tunnel, the one who said she shouldn't have come, wasn't a stranger. He'd been protecting what was left behind. She thought of the crates, labeled Vance, sealed for decades. If the company hid something down there, maybe it wasn't gold or ore. Maybe it was evidence. She needed proof. At dawn, she packed her lantern, rope, and a small camera. She descended the ladder one last time. This time, she followed the rail in the opposite direction, deeper than before. After 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, the air thick with decay. In the center stood an old cart, overturned, its contents spilled. Bones, rusted tools, a metal sign half buried in silt. She brushed it clean. It read, "Property of Vance Mining Company. Disposal shaft." Then she saw it, a row of wooden coffins, unmarked, sealed with iron nails, and behind them, a fresh lantern still burning. That's when she heard the voice again. "Clara, you were never supposed to find this." She turned. The man from before stood there, face shadowed beneath his cap, eyes hollow. "What did you do to them?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He simply pointed to one coffin. Carved into the lid was her family name, Vance. Soundscape, a single lantern hiss, the slow echo of dripping water, faint wind in a distant shaft. Clara stood frozen, the glow of her lantern trembling across the stacked coffins. The man's voice was low, roughened by years of dust and secrets. "You shouldn't have come," he said again. "Then tell me why my name is carved on that box." He didn't move. Finally, he exhaled. "Because the Vances didn't just own this mine, they buried it." He told her he was Walter Pike, the last surviving son of one of the miners who died in the Hollow Creek collapse. Only the collapse hadn't been an accident. "Your great-grandfather struck a vein of silver under this mountain," he said. "But the deeper they dug, the more gas built up." Men warned him. He sealed their reports. When the explosion came, he told the papers every man died instantly. But that wasn't true. Some miners survived, trapped below ground, sealed in to keep the story quiet. To hide the evidence, the company built over the shaft, turned the area into private land, and years later sold it off as a hunting plot. The cabin above became nothing more than an address on a map, until Clara showed up. "Your name on that box?" Walter's voice cracked. "That's your inheritance." The secret they left for the next generation to carry. Clara stepped closer to the coffin with Vance carved into the lid. Rust flaked away under her fingers. She didn't open it, she couldn't, but she noticed something new. Beneath the name were smaller letters, barely visible under grime. She wiped the surface clean and read, "Truth belongs to the living." Beneath the phrase, a keyhole. Walter looked away. "He left that for you?" Clara reached into her coat pocket. From the day she'd arrived, she'd carried the old key found inside her tin lunchbox. The only thing she'd had as a child. It fit. The lock turned with a dull click. Inside was no body, just a ledger, bound in leather, edges burned. Walter whispered. He did write it down. Page after page told of hidden tunnels, forged reports, and bribes paid to county officials, but the final entry stopped her breath. To my granddaughter, or to anyone who finds this truth. The men were never dead. I left them below. Forgive me. Her hands shook. The miners hadn't been buried by chance. They had been sealed alive in a lower section of the mine, left there so the company wouldn't lose its fortune. She turned to Walter. We have to tell the town. He looked up at the dripping ceiling. They'll never believe you. They don't want to. Clara climbed out of the tunnel at dawn. Mud streaked across her clothes. The valley below was still sleeping. She walked straight to the sheriff's office, the ledger clutched to her chest. When he saw her, his face drained of color. Where'd you get that? It was under my cabin, she said. You knew. He didn't answer. He just shut the blinds and whispered, There are people in this town who'd rather you didn't talk. That night, someone knocked on her door. Once, then twice. When she didn't answer, the sound stopped, replaced by the rumble of a truck engine fading into the trees. By morning, the sheriff had left town without a word. The next week, heavy rain swept through the valley. The ground behind the cabin softened, and the hillside gave way, opening a wide gap where the tunnel had been. From the road, townsfolk saw it, a black wound in the earth, and within it, the faint outline of timbers, rails, and something else. Wooden markers. No one spoke. Newspapermen came from Missoula, asking questions. The town claimed ignorance, but Clara showed them the ledger. The story spread fast. Within days, old records were pulled from archives, names reappeared in obituaries, and the word Vance became a curse in Hollow Creek. Clara never gave another interview. She stayed in the cabin through the summer, silent, watching as work crews fenced off the land and sealed the tunnel once more. But every night, she still heard the whisper under the floorboards, a voice that sounded less like warning now and more like regret. By autumn, the forest was quiet again. Leaves covered the scars in the ground, and the pines swayed as if nothing had happened. Clara often sat by the hearth, staring at the spot where the trapdoor used to be. The ledger rested on the table beside her, open to the last line her great-grandfather wrote. Truth belongs to the living. She wondered if that meant peace for the dead, or punishment for those left behind. Then one night, she woke to the sound of boots on the porch. Slow, measured, familiar. A knock, 3 times. She didn't move. When she finally opened the door at dawn, the porch was empty, but beside the steps lay a lantern, still warm to the touch. Inside it, the wick was new. By November, snow had covered the valley. The fences around the tunnel stood like scars against the white hills. Clara rarely went into town now. People watched her with the half-fear, half-guilt that comes after a truth everyone wished had stayed buried. Sometimes at night, she would light the lantern left on her porch, set it by the window, and watch its glow flicker against the falling snow. She never knew who had left it for her, Walter, perhaps, or someone else who knew the mountain's secrets, but she kept it burning, the way you keep a promise you didn't mean to make. One morning she found an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside was a single page, the handwriting old and deliberate. They were found, Clara. Not all, but enough to know the truth. The state will call it closure. I call it a debt paid late. No signature, only a smudge of coal at the bottom edge. She burned the letter in the stove, but its words stayed with her. Somewhere under all that rock, her family's ghosts had been counted and laid to rest. But rest is a complicated thing in Hollow Creek. That evening, the wind rose again, the kind of mountain wind that seems to circle the valley, gathering every lost sound. When she stepped outside, the lantern flared brighter than it had before, as if someone had just touched the glass. From the woods came a faint tapping, metal against stone, slow, repeating. She followed it to the edge of the old rail line, half buried in frost. A single rail glinted through the snow, and along it ran a small child's footprint, fresh. She whispered into the dark, "Walter?" No answer, only the echo of the tap fading into stillness. The next morning, Clara packed a rope, her lantern, and the ledger. She told no one. By dusk, she was at the edge of the collapse site. The workers' fence had fallen in the wind. Snow filled the gaps like unhealed scars. She lowered herself into the opening, the lantern swaying above her. The air below was still. No voices now, no dripping water, just the sound of her breath and the soft scratch of her boots on stone. She reached the wooden markers again. Each bore a name she had read in the ledger. Beside them lay an empty space, waiting. Clara knelt there, set down the book, and whispered, "It's finished now." Then she blew out the lantern. When the snow cleared in spring, hikers found the cabin doors wide open. Inside, on the table, the ledger rested beside the extinguished lantern. A single page had been added at the end in unfamiliar handwriting. For Clara Vance, who carried the light long enough for others to see. No one ever found her. Some said she left, heading east to start over. Others swore they saw a lantern moving through the pines on stormy nights, tracing the line of the old railroad. A pale glow drifting toward the mountains, searching for what the living had finally learned to remember. In Hollow Creek, some truths don't die when the people do. They wait in the dark for someone brave or foolish enough to listen.